too loud. You
No,
right?
you're fine.
All right.
Well, hello and welcome to Beaverdale Books. Thanks so much for coming out for tonight's book talk. And before we begin, I want to mention another upcoming event. We are looking forward to Karina Dieters on Saturday, May 30 at 2 p.m. And she's going to share her book of poetry, and that's titled Marred Mask.
What day of the week?
That's Saturday at 2 p.m.
Okay.
Now, on to tonight's program. Bursting with cinematic action, horror, fun, and suspense.
No sex?
Town.
No sex?
I don't know. Town is an old-school, pulse-pounding pulp horror adventure. If you like classic creature feature horror fiction like Jaws and Night of the Crabs, or B-movie monster mayhem like Them and Starship Troopers, you will love Town. Christopher A. Micklos is a lifelong horror junkie, an award-winning filmmaker, and a frequently published writer of horror-themed fiction and non-fiction. So please join me in a warm welcome for Christopher, and you can ask him your questions.
Where does he live?
I'm in Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, do you?
Yeah. I'm here visiting. So, again, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thanks to the gang here for coming out. I really very much appreciate it. As you said, my name is Christopher Micklos, and I'm going to be talking about my debut pulp horror novel, Town, today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the tradition of pulp horror, which this is very much a part of. And then we'll have time. I'll do a little reading. There'll be a time for Q&A if people have any questions. But I wanted to start naturally at the ending of the story because that's how you do it. And when you're a first-time author like me, you write your book. At least this was my experience. You write your book, and then you don't really know what you're going to do with it. And I, read all the blogs, and I joined all the Facebook groups and followed all the discussions. And I learned, there's all kinds of things you can do with the book to get it out to the public, but the kind of the brass rings were finding a traditional publisher, and then if you really wanted to reach for the stars, it was sign with a literary agent. But that's the unthinkable goal that so many strive for, but struggle with. And you hear the horror stories. I waited years before I found an agent. I wrote 12 books, and I couldn't find an agent. And on and on. I have a good friend in Wisconsin who won the Bram Stoker Award for best first book. And the Bram Stokers are like they're the Oscars of horror writing. And that was 6 years ago, and she hasn't signed with an agent yet. And it's just the dumbest thing you can imagine because she's so talented. So I say all that because I was very fortunate early on. I did sign with a literary agent, and I did find a traditional publisher. And especially when you sign with an agent, you think, oh, now I've made it. My life is going to change. I'm going to sit in my basement, I'm going to be on my laptop, and I'm going to write all day, and someone's going to be out there selling my books, and someone's going to be making deals with bookstores, and there's going to be publicists, planning my book tour. And I'm probably going to have to hire an accountant to count all the money. And of course, that's nothing at all what it's like. And when you're an independent author, you have to depend on yourself. You do everything yourself. The publisher will do the blocking and tackling of getting the book ready for market. But if you want it in a brick and mortar bookstore, you've got to reach out to the brick and mortar bookstore. If you want people to find it on Amazon, for example, you have to make sure they find it on Amazon. You do everything yourself. And so when a bookstore says, hey, thanks for contacting us, we'd love to stock a few copies of your book, it's a minor miracle. And especially when a bookstore like Beaverdale Books says, come on in, we're going to put up some posters, we're going to roll out the red carpet, we're going to introduce you to our readers. It is absolute wonderful thing, and I'm so grateful for you guys for having me in, and so grateful for all you guys for coming out and giving me a chance to chat with you a little bit about my book. So what I always say about Ticktown is that the log line of the book is a rural Wisconsin tourist town becomes the feeding ground for a band of giant mutant ticks. And I always say, if you hear the log line and you see my cover, you know exactly what you're getting from Ticktown.
It's the perfect time of the year.
It's the perfect time
just
of
when
the year.
ticks come out.
It is, absolutely. It's a summer read. It's a summer read. And there's no mystery about what you're going to get from this book. It is fast-paced. It is big bugs rampaging through northern Wisconsin. It's pure pulp entertainment at its purest, if I do say so myself. And so, because I talk about pulp a lot, I wanted to kind of just talk a little bit about the background of what pulp is. Because I was on Hello, Iowa this morning, and they asked me, well, I've never heard of pulp fiction or pulp horror. What is it? So I thought maybe it'd be good to take a few minutes to just talk about that. I suspect some of you in the group here know what it is and where it comes from, but I'll give just a quick history. So I think of pulp as a style of writing that, in horror, for example, you've got your Edgar Allan Poe, who I loved growing up. You've got your Bram Stoker. You've got Shelley's Frankenstein. And those, to me, are the meats and vegetables of horror writing. Those are the ones that are packed with protein and nutrients and great literary writing and substance. And pulp is the ice cream and candy of horror writing. It'll give you a great sugar rush. You're not going to get much nutrients out of it, but your head's going to explode, and you're going to have a wonderful time with it. So that's the informal definition. But what it actually is the pulps began at the turn of the 20th century, when in the late 1800s, from the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, publishers began to discover a cheaper way of publishing their magazines, and so they started printing them on very cheap wood pulp paper, which is very thin paper, very cheap to produce. And what that allowed them to do was they could print a lot more magazines. They could sell the magazines a lot cheaper than they could, their literary journals before, and they were able to tap into a mass market. But in order to market to a mass market, you need stories and writing that's more accessible than what had traditionally been in those magazines previously. And so you got these sensationalist stories, you got larger than life heroes, you got big monsters, you got the evilest of villains, and the writing was very stripped down. It was very straightforward, not a lot of flowery language, and it was a new kind of entertainment, written entertainment, that became known as pulp. And the first pulp magazine was called Argosy, and it was I think it was let me just check it. I think it was 1896 when it was first published, and it was an adventure magazine. It was kind of like the Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark of its day, men's adventure sort of things.
Is that Argosy?
I'm sorry, Argosy. Yeah, Argosy. Following in its footsteps over the next 10, 20, 30 years, you had pulps that were dedicated to mysteries. You had pulps that were dedicated to detective fiction, to science fiction, and then of course to horror. And the first real influential horror pulp was called Weird Tales, and it was founded in 1923. And the writers of these pulps were considered kind of hacks, right? They were they could their skill was to just tear off all kinds of 10,000 words a day, 15,000 words a day. They were able to write fast-moving, quick stories, and many of them toiled in anonymity, and many of them, or some of them, I should say, went on to become some of the biggest names in genre fiction. Dashiell Hammett and wrote for the Raymond Chandler wrote for the detective pulps. Isaac Asimov wrote for the science fiction pulps. H.P. Lovecraft was one of the first authors to be published in the one I mentioned, Weird Tales, as a horror pulp. And these are obviously Louis L'Amour was being published in the Western pulps, and they became some of the most influential writers in genre fiction over the next 50 years. And we got characters out of the pulps that have endured for 125 years. Tarzan was born in those early pulp magazines. Conan the Barbarian was born in those magazines. Buck Rogers was born in those magazines. And I mentioned Lovecraft. His whole Cthulhu mythology grew out of that era. And those pulps thrived until the late 1940s, early 1950s. And eventually they began to fade when they were supplanted with comic books, which started tapping into a very similar market. TV was on the rise then, and that kind of helped usher about the end of the pulp magazines. And I like to think, though this isn't necessarily what you'll find in the history books, but the rise of the drive-in theater, I think, had a lot to do with the end of the pulps, because you were getting the same kind of entertainment, but you were getting it at the drive-in with big bug sci-fi horror movies like Them and Black Scorpion and all those fun things that were treading a lot of the same ground as the pulps did. So they began to fade in the early 1950s, and they didn't really come back with a vengeance until the 70s and 80s, and I'll definitely get to that. But I thought, since that's kind of where I discovered them, not in the 70s and 80s, but many years later, because when I was a kid and when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, I knew nothing about this stuff. I was completely unaware of what pulp horror was. A lot of the authors that thrived in the genre, I was unfamiliar with. But I did have a passion for storytelling, and I wanted to make movies. And so I went off to college, and I studied filmmaking, and was ready to go on to UCLA grad school to become a filmmaker. And then one of those, sorry about the Facebook feed, but one of those bastard professors got in my head and lit a love of politics in me, and totally ruined my plans to go on to become a filmmaker. And I got a fire for politics. I went back to grad school to study political communication, and then for the next 20 years, I worked in politics. I owned a media consulting firm that worked with candidates and organizations on political campaigns. I was a spokesman for several politicians. I've ran campaigns. And then after 20 years, I decided I needed something that wasn't quite as horrifying as politics. And so I went back to my first love of horror. And my two partners, who I was in business with at this media firm, and we were all movie fans, excuse me, and we decided we were going to try and make a movie ourselves. It was the age of digital cameras, and you could do it on the cheap, and so the three of us sat down and said, we're going to just start making a movie and see how far we can get. And we got pretty far, and by the end of the process, we had a 90-minute, low-budget ghost story called The Nursery, which was kind of a throwback to the old 70s horror movies, very stripped of color, very raw performances. Think Phantasm, but not as good. I have enough confidence to say it's not as good as Phantasm. But we had a lot of fun with it. We found some success. We found a distributor. It got out into the world. And so we made another movie. So that was released in 2018. We made another one a few years later called The Headmistress, which is another ghost story. We were given access to an abandoned nunnery in southeastern Wisconsin. Two huge buildings built in the 1940s and 50s. Super creepy buildings, a terrible cellar and attic. Closets that only locked from the inside, so you'd have to lock yourself in to lock the closet. Just the strangest things you can imagine. And we, my co-director and I, and the crew and the cast all moved in to the nunnery for 12 nights, and we lived together, and we made a movie together, and that was The Headmistress. And we had just finished shooting it when COVID hit, and that dramatically slowed down our filmmaking process. We post-production ended up taking us almost 2 years. It took even longer to get it into distribution, even though it was a better film than our first film. So the film that we finished shooting in 2019 didn't come out until 2023. We got some theatrical play out of it, which was really cool. We won some awards, which was really nice. But I started to feel like I didn't want to have my creative output come once every half decade. And so I thought maybe a good way to do it, where you didn't have to count on a lot of other people, you didn't have to raise money to do it, would be to write a novel. Excuse me. So at that time, because it was COVID time and we all had a lot of time on our hands, I started reading more, and I stumbled across a book called Paperbacks from Hell. Has anyone ever heard of Paperbacks from Hell? It's a very cool book, which I recommend highly. It's by authors Will Erickson and Grady Hendrix. And what it is it's a survey, a pictorial survey of the 70s and 80s pulp horror paperbacks. And it's kind of a celebration of like the lurid covers and the beautiful artwork that they used to sell these books. But it was also, they gave overviews of all these books and the crazy plots and the gonzo writing. And I was reading this book and, reading about all these books that I'd never heard of. And I thought, this sounds like the most wonderful thing I've ever heard of. I mean, it really took me back to my childhood days watching monster movies on Saturday night, late shows. And so I started picking up these books, and I started reading authors I'd never heard of before, like Guy Masterton, who wrote The Manitou, which is one of his most famous books, or The Djinn. Sean Hudson, the British godfather of gore, who wrote the slimy bug horror story Slugs. And my favorite, as it turned out, when I discovered him, Guy N. Smith, who was a British writer in the 70s and 80s. He wrote about werewolves, and he wrote about slime beasts, and he wrote about witches, and he wrote about cannibals. He wrote about horrible places like haunted woods and sucking pits. Wink, wink. He was kind of a dirty old man. But mostly he wrote about giant mutant killer crabs. And his seminal book was called Night of the Crabs. And it came out in the mid-70s, and it was basically giant mutant crabs rampaging through the Welsh countryside. And he went on, he wrote almost a dozen more crab books, and eventually they left Wales, and the crabs, infiltrated all of England, and then all of Great Britain, and then they got, into the waters of the ocean. They came to America, and it was a big mess.
I hope they didn't pick up the Welsh accent.
They were clickety-click of their heels was the Welsh accent. Wonderful books. I just fell in love with them. They took me back to those big bug sci-fi movies I loved so much as a kid. And I thought, that's the kind of book that I want to write. And so I started playing around with some ideas. I couldn't do crabs, obviously, because that had been done to perfection. Spiders had been done to death, and on and on. I kind of went down the litany, and I realized that ticks had never really been done, in this kind of book before. And I'm in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin is just crawling with ticks. And so I did my research, and I realized how horrible, disgusting creatures ticks actually are. The cover image here, other than the glowing red eyes, this is what like a tick looks like up close. They've got these horrible mandibles, mouth parts. They've got claws on their, on their legs. They're just terrible, horrible things. And vicious too.
They don't get no respect.
They get they're not for me either, because they're just the worst. And so I decided to play around and start thinking, maybe I'll do something like that. And I decided I was going to noodle it for a while, and I started writing something else. I was working on a screenplay, just a spec screenplay, and I got this was in about April of 2023. I got about halfway through that screenplay, and I just hit just a horrible writer's block, and it was just I just couldn't go any further with it for some reason. And so I decided maybe I should put it aside for a week or two, start writing something else, and just see if I can get my groove back on the screenplay. And I thought this would be a good time to start fooling around with that novel. And so I sat down in April of 2023. I started writing Ticktown, and I did go back to the screenplay, but it wasn't until 2 years later, because for the next 9 months I toiled away in absolute bliss on a Ticktown. I was having the time of my life writing it. And by the end of 2023, I had my first draft in place, and I tore off a couple more drafts over the next month or so. I gave it to a friend of mine to read, and kind of, the classic, do I have something here? And he enjoyed it very much, even though it's not really his cup of tea in terms of the genre. And that gave me the confidence to finish it off, write another draft, clean it up, and start reaching out to agents and publishers in earnest. But since that's the point at which I've completed writing Ticktown, maybe this would be a good time to stop and do a little bit of a reading. I'm not quite sure how far in we are. I forgot to set my timer.
We're 25 minutes in.
Okay, well that's perfect. So I'm gonna read a chapter from Ticktown. It is actually, a lot of times authors will read the first chapter, but I wanted to read something that comes at the beginning of the third act of the book, because I think it gives a real nice flavor of what you're going to get from this novel. And it's where we're picking up the action is our intrepid heroes, Jackson and Emmaline. Jackson is the owner of a dying rural newspaper, one of the last of its kind in northern Wisconsin. Emmaline is his cub reporter who's trying to drag him and the paper into the 21st century. And with the backdrop of the Harvest Moon Jubilee about to, there's lots of tropes in this book. It's just packed full of tropes. The festival is going on, and tourists are going to be coming to town, and it's their life's blood. They start investigating mysterious livestock deaths and the disappearance of tourists, and they discover that there's something lurking in the woods. And by the point that we get to when I'm going to read to you, they've discovered that there's actually giant ticks in the woods, and they think that they may have actually found their nest in a abandoned pesticides plant, ironically, on the edge of town. So this is them entering the tick nest, chapter 35. Jackson and Emmaline both gasped at the horrors stretching out before them in the long corridor leading through the heart of Tomahawk Hollow pesticides. Though not as large as the ones they had encountered in the woods, dozens of the loathsome tick larvae clambered about on the concrete floor. Glistening with slimy sheen of birth goo, the barely developed claws of the recent hatchlings click-clacked noisily on the hard surface as they scampered about. Emmaline shuddered. Between the red glow of the floodlights, the teeming mass of savage demons, and the ghastly promise of what awaited them deeper into the complex, it seemed to her that they were entering a passageway to hell. "Stand behind me," Jackson said, snapping Emmaline out of it. Aiming the flamethrower low, Jackson unleashed a furious stream of orange and yellow blaze at the creatures. Some managed to scamper away from the Syrian attack, lurching to one side of the hall or the other, or retreating backwards to escape the assault. The ones that weren't quick enough got engulfed by the flames, writhing in torment. One creature's exoskeleton crackled and sizzled under the blaze, oozing boiling secretions as the fire consumed it. Within moments, the monstrous thing succumbed to the intense heat and shriveled to a charred, lifeless husk, reeking of scorched chitin. Soon the hallway was cleared, the mutant ticks either perishing under Jackson's assault or instinctively retreating in shrieking terror to the safety of the plant. Jackson extinguished the flamethrower, and he and Emmaline looked at each other in surprise. Maybe they really could do this. Advancing down the hall, they moved cautiously forward, careful to avoid the handful of ticks that were still in the final throes of their fiery extermination. Along the way, they passed closed doors that appeared to lead to a suite of offices, a utility closet, and a cafeteria. Just before reaching the double doors to the plant, they came to an extra-wide elevator. Neither would have thought anything of it, but the control panel on the wall featured what appeared to be a retina scanner. Again, they exchanged glances. "That's pretty serious security for a pesticides plant," Emmaline observed before they pressed forward to the end of the hallway. When they reached the open double doors, a small cluster of tick larvae were gathered just inside the production area, blocking the entryway. Though just steps from Emmaline and Jackson, the six-legged monsters were too preoccupied to bother with the two interlopers. Jackson leveled the flamethrower, and the weapon belched a quick burst of searing flame towards the creatures, just enough to make them scatter. When Emmaline and Jackson saw what the ticks had been swarming over, they froze in their tracks. It was one of the German henchmen. I should have mentioned that these books always have vaguely Nazi characters. So, and I don't disappoint. It was one of the German henchmen, or more precisely, half of one of the German henchmen, the upper half, cleaved off just above the waist. He was face down in a puddle of his own blood, arms splayed awkwardly, and his shredded intestines spilling out the open base of his torso. What they could see of his flesh had been hacked and sliced and torn to pieces, and his lower half was nowhere to be seen. Even as they registered shock over the grisly remains, the nightmarish scene just beyond the mangled corpse demanded their attention. The cavernous chamber still bore some resemblance to the pesticide production plant that it once was. Abandoned reactors and pumps and filtration systems were positioned throughout the plant, just as they were on the day it closed its doors. And much deeper into the expansive industrial space, they could see a massive tank farm. In it, huge chemical storage cylinders sprouted from the concrete floor and rose 45 feet into the catwalk maze just under the vaulted ceiling. But even though they could recognize what it once was, there was no denying what the gigantic apartment had become: a nest of giant mutant ticks. Eggs, some the size of soccer balls and others as big as watermelons, were strewn and piled everywhere across the expanse of the plant. The tawny vein pods pulsated with menace, the twitching mutants inside impatiently awaiting their hellish birth. And there were thousands of them. All around them, wobbling on unsteady legs, newly hatched tick larvae clambered over and around the mounds of gelatinous eggs. As Jackson and Emmaline watched, 5 of the smaller creatures converged on one of the throbbing pods. Inside it, one of their brethren was struggling to escape. At first, the fetal monster merely pushed and punched against the gummy confines of the egg. Then, when one of its underdeveloped claws finally punctured the surface and poked out into the open air, the action triggered the other ticks into a frenzy. The little demons slashed and tore at the outer casing of the egg like 5 mutant midwives, eagerly hastening the birth of another savage predator to join their crusade of mayhem and slaughter. When the slime-covered hatchling finally stepped free of its mangled sanctum, the others began to pick away at the viscid globs of egg viscera and that still clung to it. Thoroughly disgusted by the profane spectacle, Jackson aimed the flamethrower and unleashed a torrent of fire into their midst. The blaze engulfed the 6 larvae, flaming gel adhering to their bodies and igniting each of them into scampering, screaming balls of fire. None got far before they succumbed, shriveled, and died. "I'll kill these things one by one if I have to," Jackson vowed, stepping forward towards another pile of mutant eggs. But Emmaline grabbed his arm and held him back. "Wait," she said, motioning to the revolting remains of the German goon. "Those things couldn't have done that." He looked up at her grimly, realizing that she was right. "There's something bigger in here," she warned, "much bigger." As if on cue, a booming roar thundered from the depths of the plant. Unlike anything Jackson or Emmaline had ever heard before, the rumbling caw pounded their eardrums and filled them with dread. Icy fingers of fear reached down into their chests and squeezed their hearts as the unseen colossus answered the dying cries of the slain larvae with a bestial declaration of violence and rage. I don't think we're going to have a lot of time. Jackson stood, struggling for a moment to get the words out. We have to get that, he pointed to the backpack full of explosives, over there. He gestured towards the tank farm at the far end of the chamber. Without waiting for a reply, Jackson moved forward, discharging another belch of fire at the front to startle a pack of scampering tick larvae out of his path. Make sure they don't close in behind us, Jackson directed, but Emmaline had no idea how she could prevent it. They had only gotten a few steps forward when another thunderous din rose from the direction of the tank farm, inciting the tick hatchlings into convulsions of excitement. This time, there was no need for Jackson and Emmaline to imagine what kind of ungodly creature could make that sound. This time, the monster tramped out of concealment at the tank farm and into plain view. Jackson and Emmaline stopped, dumbfounded in their tracks. Standing nearly 15 feet tall, the monster tick had the massive body of a bull elephant. With 8 thick brown legs splayed all around it, the thing had a wingspan approaching 30 feet. Its head and mouth parts alone were the size of a kitchen cabinet, its ceclerie extending forward like industrial chainsaws wrapped in thick barbed wire. As it rumbled past the chemical tanks and through the nest, the immense legs sent clusters of turgid, slimy eggs skittering in all directions. It was the queen tick.
Oh.
And that's tick. Thank you. So, I'd love to take any questions you might have, or if there's anything you guys want to talk about, what brought you here, or what excites you about the idea of these kinds of books and movies. I'd love to talk about it.
We'll start with an easy one.
All right.
The cover. Because that's kind of a hallmark of the pulp fiction books, is that eye catcher. And that's what you're, oh, gotta have this.
So I actually love talking about the cover. I love my cover. When my agent and I were talking to publishers, one of the things that I made clear was the cover art was going to be incredibly important to me. And it wasn't really an ego thing. It was just because I'm the guy who reads these books. Like, I'm the target audience. And it's exactly what you said, is that you pick it up, you have a feeling of it, and you think, okay, this is what I want. I want to see the monster. I want to get a sense of what the book is. And so I told them what I'm really looking for is something that evokes those pulpy paperbacks of the 70s and 80s, and the posters from these sci-fi horror movies of the 50s and 60s. And so my publisher, Castle Ridge Media, who I'm a big fan of, despite the story I'm about to tell you, was like, great. We're totally on board with that. You know, we're all for it. We signed with them. A couple months go by. I hadn't heard anything about the cover, so I reached out to them and I said, you know, we had talked about this kind of style of cover, and they said, well, that's great. Why don't you send us samples of what you had in mind? So I sent them maybe a dozen pulpy paperback covers, all with, you know, like the Night of the Crabs paperback with the crab on the front, and on the poster to the movie Them, and Black Scorpion. And I put them in a Google folder, and I put them out there, and then I heard nothing. And you know, another month goes by, another 2 months goes by, and suddenly I get a little thing in my mailbox. We're done with your cover. And I was like, awesome. You know, I can't wait. So I opened it up, and it is this cover, except for there's no tick, there's no log line here, there's no people. It's just the sign that says, welcome to Ticktown. And then there were a couple little, like, buggy-looking things on it. And my jaw dropped. And I was like, this is nothing like what I talked about. And to their credit, you know, I called them up immediately, and they took my call. And I spoke with the person who'd been my contact mostly, and I said, geez, this is not what we discussed. And he said, yeah. He said, well, you know, we do the covers ourselves, and there's no good, what do you call it? There's no good, you know, not clip art, but there's no good, you know, accessible artwork for giant mutant ticks. And I was just dumbfounded. And I said, we can't go with this cover. It's not at all. It doesn't tell you what the book is. And we kind of wrestled back and forth for a while, and finally I said, look, if I can go find some artwork, will you use it? And they said, well, we'll consider it. And so I went to Fiverr. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Fiverr. It's a community of artists so that from all over the world that kind of will do all kinds of things for very affordable prices. So I tracked down a few different artists, and I commissioned at a relatively low expense several different potential covers, and just none of them were quite right. But one of them had this guy on it, and so I sent it to the publisher, and I said, and they said, you know what, this is taking too long, it's not working out, we're just going to go with our original cover. And I said, please, 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 just give me one more, a couple more days. And they agreed, and so I started eyeballing the cover that included this guy, and I talked to the artist, and I was like, can we, take the different layers off of this? And he said, yeah, that's fine. And so went back to the publisher, and they took his monster, they put it over the sign that they had originally designed. They found some people, put them in, and to me it just came all to life. It was so dramatically different, and it very much evoked those paperbacks that I loved so much, those movie posters I loved so much, but actually in a bit of a lighter, more fun way, because I think my book is just a little bit lighter than some of those books from the 60s or from the 70s and 80s. So that's how it came about. I'm thrilled with it. It has been a real asset to the book.
It has a campy feel to it. It's
Super.
always fun.
Yeah.
I was thinking with the giant tick, and you mentioned all the other things from the insect world. None of that really came about until the early 1900s, when the use of microscopes to the public came into use, and they could actually see these little suckers.
Right.
And so that's when, the world of art connected with the world of science, because they could see them.
Oh, completely.
And imagine it then.
Yeah, I mean, think about how you the effects, the special effects you get now of spiders with their faces and the heavy detail. Even the ticks, when I was describing kills and stuff, I would have known none of that other than the ability for high power microphones and photographic equipment to capture those images and how they eat yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Anyone else? Any other thoughts or comments or questions?
Where did you find the two people?
It was artwork that my publisher found,
Okay.
and they layered it in. Yeah.
I actually, I wrote a book, but it's not a horror book. It's more like a true crime. It's kind of based on my life, experience.
Oh, very cool.
Things I did and have done. Started back when I was in school and stuff, but I kind of did things backwards. I had it all in a journal, and it was in a box, and I never put it on Kindle or anything like that. Never thought to get it published or anything like that. And as the years went on, and then COVID hit, and then I got these journals in a box, and I was like, I'm just going to do an audiobook. And so I read it's like 17 chapters, and I read it all I made YouTube videos.
So you did your own thing, okay?
Yeah, so I kind of going backwards, but then at the same time, I'm getting advice from other writers on how to get it published and things like that, and the steps you got to go through to do it and everything like that. And, of late I've been doing on the local scene. I'm kind of known as a public activist for medical cannabis and all cannabis law reform in Iowa.
Okay.
I go by Reverend Ray Green. That's my stage name. And I've been doing stand-up recently too. And so, some things I'll say is going to shock people's eyelids, but at the same time, I'm retired and I'm enjoying it, and I figured I love horror films. We were talking about Svengoolie and everything like that.
Yep.
And what were the other movies that you did?
So the two movies I produced, the features were called The Nursery in 2018 and The Headmistress, which came out in 2023.
Yeah, okay.
And
Can you find those online?
Yeah. If you take my book, one of my bookmarks, it has my website on it, and you can find information. It's anywhere you can rent or buy streaming entertainment. You can get them there.
Right.
But I always point people to Tubi because it's ad-based and it's free, so you can watch them on Tubi.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool.
Well, good for you, because I mean that's
You
go.
know,
You gotta go for it sometimes.
Like I said, you know, I'm retired. I have multiple sclerosis, and I'm still able to walk and be active, and you know, just you know, like I say, I work the night shift, meaning I'm up all through the night listening to
Sure.
either Coast to Coast AM or sports radio and things like that. You know, and
Art Bell.
yeah, there we go. Jordan Ori,
Yeah,
west of the Rockies.
West of the Rockies. One of the things, just to kind of talk about how you're getting it out there
East of the Rockies.
to the
East
world,
of-
or not getting,
Yeah.
or however you plan to do it. You know, one of the stories I actually love to tell is, you know, I made a big deal at the beginning about like how, you know, special you feel when you get an agent, and you get these stories of people who, you know, spend years searching and get hundreds of rejections. And I only do this. This sounds like I'm being arrogant, but it's not, because there's a very clear moral to the story. But when I started my search for an agent, it was in February of 2024, and I sat down. This is literally, I sat down on a Tuesday, and I read somewhere that you shouldn't, you know, do it to dozens and dozens of people or hundreds of people at once. Do just a few, and then if you get feedback like, "Oh, you're doing this wrong," or "I'm reacting badly," then you can adjust and go. So I sent a query email to 6 literary agents that were accepting queries, and to 6 publishers that didn't require you to be represented by an agent to consider your manuscript. Sent them off on Tuesday morning. Tuesday afternoon, I got a note from one of the agents saying, "Hey, this sounds interesting. Can I read your manuscript?" I sent them the manuscript, and same thing. You hear, okay, it takes them 6 months to get back to you, 9 months to get back to you. Didn't think anything of it. My family, about a week later, was going to Florida. Our plane lands, and I opened my email on my phone, and this agent had written to me saying, "I love the book. I want to represent you." And this wasn't just a run-of-the-mill agent. This guy was actually in the middle at the time of handling the 50th anniversary reissue of Jaws. So this was like right in my wheelhouse, and you know, I was so excited. And I subsequently, you know, because you don't think to contact the other agents, you know, I subsequently got rejections from the other agents over the course of the next year. I signed with Mark. His name is Mark Falcon. We found a publisher. And it wasn't until like 9 months later that I think we were talking to the publisher on a Zoom call, and we were talking about pulp horror, and we were kind of trading stories. And he said, he goes, you know, the morning that Chris emailed me his query letter, I was reading an article in the New York Times about pulp horror, and then my email popped up and the subject line said Ticktown, a pulp horror novel. And I thought, oh, I should open this email. And that's why he was interested. And I often think that if he hadn't been reading that article, my email might have gone into the ether, and I might still be looking for someone to represent and publish TikTok. So there's a tremendous amount of luck that goes into it, whether it's finding an agent or a publisher. And I got incredibly lucky, and I couldn't be more grateful for it.
Where does an audiobook fit into TikTok?
So my publisher is Castlebridge Media, and you're going to embarrass me because I'm totally blanking. We went separately. We held on to the audio rights, and we a few months before the book was going to come out, we pitched audio rights to various audio publishers, and I am completely blanking on the name of my audio publisher because I had almost nothing to do with them. They bought the rights, and then they produced the book themselves, and voila, it came out on the same day as the print book. So it's out there on audio. It's only in paperback. It was because it was inspired by the paperbacks. I didn't want a hard copy edition. We only did paperbacks. We have Kindle editions, of course, to make it a little bit more accessible, and then the audio book as well, which is done with a professional voice, and it's a nice audio book. It's a nice audio book. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Did you want to talk about your other book just a minute?
I'll mention it real quickly as I walk by. The other book that I brought with me, in case anyone's interested, is called A Wisconsin Harvest of Horror, and this is a book. So there's a horror writers association. It's actually international, and it's the organization that gives out the Bram Stoker Awards, and they organize StokerCon, and all kinds of stuff like that. And anyway, I belong to the Wisconsin chapter of the Horror Writers Association, and this spring we put out an anthology book called The Wisconsin Harvest of Horror that is basically 15 Wisconsin set horror stories by 15 different Wisconsin authors, and you get stories about actual real life Wisconsin legends and hauntings. There's cryptids,
Yes.
there's ghosts, there's all kinds of things. And my story is called Hellbugs, and it's very much similar to the idea of Ticktown. It's about giant marauding insects in northern Wisconsin, but this time in the lakes of northern Wisconsin. And it's actually, Hellbugs is actually it's the first chapter set piece of my next novel, which is called The Beast from Black Lake, which is currently, we're looking for a publisher for it currently. But if you want a preview of my next novel, it's in a Wisconsin Harvest of Horror, and it's called Hellbugs.
What about Bigfoot? Isn't Bigfoot up there too?
We don't really, I mean, everyone's got some Bigfoot, but we don't really have Bigfoot.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't, I think it's more Minnesota
They do.
than us. Though we have a couple of towns that purport to be Bigfoot towns, but it's not as big a thing in Wisconsin. Yeah.
So speaking of Minnesota,
Yeah.
Minneapolis, St. Paul has a huge horror community, for real. I don't know if you've done anything there, but you should probably, I don't know, through your connections, see if there's an opportunity. They have a very big horror they're very much supportive of that genre.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
just so you know.
I know, I appreciate that. I did a book event in Minneapolis.
Okay.
There's a couple of really cool stores up there.
There are.
Yeah, and when I was doing that event, I was reaching out to various Facebook groups and stuff like that, and I stumbled across it was like, I can't remember the name of the group now, but it was like a Minneapolis Horror Society, and they did all kinds of things related to books and going to movies and stuff like that. It was just basically horror enthusiasts in Minneapolis, and some of them came out to the reading. And as much as grateful as I was that came out to the reading, I was more like, oh my God, I want to create a society like that in Madison. And so
There's actually a book club there, the Horror Explorers Book Club, and they have about 30 or 40 people each month that go to it.
Oh,
but
very
then, like you said, there's bookstore. There's a specific horror bookstore, and it's a big community for that. So.
Yeah. Thanks for mentioning that. Are you from the area or?
No, but I have some friends up there. I go up there sometimes.
Gotcha. Anything else?
Does University of Iowa have a film making program? I thought they did.
So
Cinematography, film
Writers, they have film writers and stuff.
yeah, I don't know about production, but when I was a student, this was again like 25 years ago, I looked at Iowa for a film criticism program, to become a film critic and an academic. And they had a very well-known program at that time, but I don't know if they do production as well. I mean, everyone does production now, but I don't know how.
It's not a very strong one, but our daughter got her undergraduate degree there before she got her MFA at NYU Tisch School of the Arts.
Oh, so she took a step down to go to graduate school. Tisch School.
But they do
That's
have a
phenomenal.
program in there, and mostly through the writing, they have some pretty good credentialed people who have come through the program.
Oh, very cool.
Where has she gone
Woods
before
and-
here?
I can't think of his last name, but they did the horror films where you had to be quiet.
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of that.
The recent ones you're talking
Yes,
about, right?
yeah.
They have a horror film.
But they have
Film right
University
in
of
the
Iowa.
White House.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, I actually got my graduate street degree from Iowa City.
Oh, did you really? Okay.
No, that's what I say. I was living I moved to Tucson after high school.
Oh, okay.
And let's just say, I've been selling weed since I was 14 years old, And by the time I moved to Tucson, 85, by the time all my friends from Des Moines, they were going to school up in Iowa City, they'd come out and visit me down in Tucson. The next thing I'm smuggling weed to Tucson through the airport. you know, my suitcase, you know.
You can edit that out, right?
No, my book's called Burnt Crosses, Tales from the South Side. It's a true crime story. And here's the thing. I can talk about it because everything that happened was over 7 years ago, so I'm outside of the statute of limitations. I've already talked it over with the local police here in Des Moines.
There you
Paul
go.
Krzyzek, you know. He's the police spokesman person here in Des Moines, and we had a conversation about it. He goes, the only thing that's not outside the statute of limitations is murder and incest and rape, you know, so I was like, well, I'm good there.
Right.
I just smuggling weed.
The things you learn at a book
That's right.
Well, you know, it just adds to my, I guess, what I'm trying to accomplish, you know.
Absolutely.
Just try and talk to people, and, you know, like I said, it's on YouTube if anybody ever wants to look it up. It's called Burnt Cross, Tales from the South Side. My YouTube page, Rev Ray Green. And so, I mean, if anybody's interested, if they're not, if they just think I'm crazy, yeah, I'm pretty crazy. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I have multiple sclerosis. And
I will check it out tonight when I go back to the.
if you want,
All right, let's hear it. Let's hear it for Christopher Micklos.
Guys,
Yes. Thank you
so much for
Thank